My guests tonight are Ken Fleming and Dave Garcia. Ken Fleming was a director of behavioral health services in Colusa County, and before that, drug and alcohol services in Napa County. And Dave Garcia was a state park ranger at Lake Oroville.
Yes.
And also the local president of the Sierra Club.
A while back, yes.
A while back. Mm-hmm. And Dave has been sort of the voice of science against fracking and in support of the fracking ban here in Butte County. And Ken has been the political brain behind the victory that the fracking ban people had here in Butte County. In Butte County, California, 71% of the voters voted to ban fracking throughout Butte County. And that happened just a short time ago in our June election.
Yeah, June 7th.
June 7th. And so what we're going to talk about here today is how they did that, how they banned fracking in Butte County, and how other counties can do that throughout the state and throughout the country. First of all, I'm gonna ask Dave to talk a little bit about what fracking is. And so what is fracking, Dave?
Well, basically hydraulic fracturing is the unconventional process of extracting gas and oil out of the ground. And they call it unconventional because, you know, back in 1985, California peaked with oil, and, you know, everybody back then was watching the Beverly Hillbillies, and Jed Clampett shot his gun and oil came bubbling up. Well, those days are long gone. And now, you know, there's oil in the ground, but a lot of it's found in the shale or in sandstone. And so now they've come up with a process of where they add fracking chemicals. And one of the reasons they add the chemicals is they need to keep the oil that comes up clean. So they put biocides in it, because if it gets contaminated, it'll produce hydrogen sulfide and it can explode like we have the bomb trains exploding. It has hydrogen sulfide in it. And they add these other chemicals, and another chemicals they add is to make it slick, because what they're going to do is they're going to add the chemicals to water, lots of water. And here in California, they'll add 150,000 gallons of water with 1% chemicals, and then they add sand, and then they pump it down the well hole, and then they put it under pressure. Like there's a well in Glenn County that was fracked, and they put pressure from 6,200 to 7,200 psi, and this cracked the strata that the gas was in. So when they released the pressure, the gas and the frack fluid and water came back up. And so this is the process now, which we call unconventional extraction of gas and oil, whereas before they used to just drill the hole and they'd pump it out, or it'd just come bubbling out.
So they still drill a hole like they did in the old days. Right,
but what they're actually doing now is they're going back to these old wells and they're reworking them. And basically they call it well stimulation treatment. So basically they'll have wells and they'll frack them because that'll increase the production of gas or oil from 3 to 5 times. And so they're going after the stuff. You know, there's still a lot of gas or oil in the strata. You know, they got the nice, you know, kind of like if you think of a honey jar, you know, we got all the nice honey that was nice and, you know, easy to get out in the middle of the jar. Now they're going after the honey that's kind of lining the jar. And that's the strata that, you know, the gas and the oil is found in that strata. And that's why they're fracking it and breaking up that strata, pumping, you know, the water, breaking it up more. And when they release the pressure, the gas and the oil comes up with the water.
So I'm still trying to picture. So let's assume that back in the 80s they had a hole that they had drilled. Now that hole from back in the 80s, does it have some sort of casing around it?
Right. Basically, they'll have a steel tube, the annulus. And you know, that's the tube that they're going to be bringing up the gas or the oil in. And then they also put a casing around it to stabilize it and you know, to keep any contamination of fluids coming up that tube on the outside. And so that's the cement casing. So you got the cement casing, and then you have the steel tubing, the annulus, that goes down into the well.
So there's a cement casing, and then the steel tube is inside of it.
Correct. Yeah, they cement around the steel tube.
And is that already in the ground from back in the 80s, or do they put a new one in there?
Depends on the age of the well. They'll actually, rework an old well. They'll use the same casing in that in the steel. When they do new wells, like they're doing in North Dakota, they'll actually drill the hole and do the casing and the annulus, and then do the actual fracking. And so the fracking is done in 1 or 2 days.
And some of the chemicals help separate the oil or gas from other things that might be in the ground.
Right, like they'll use acid, and acid will actually eat, like for instance the calcium carbonate, and that'll allow the gas or the oil to flow out easier. So there's a lot of different chemicals that are used. Here in California, they've determined there's over 300 chemicals that are used in fracking. And then worldwide, there's over 1,000. So, I mean, there's a lot of chemicals that are being used. And, the fair share of them are toxic, poisonous, carcinogenic. For instance, benzene is one of the chemicals that's used. The EPA has determined the maximum contamination level for benzene is 5 parts per billion. And so when they use benzene, they dilute it, and it's been determined that basically at a diluted state, 1 gallon of frac fluid can contaminate 1 million gallons of water. So you got a 1 to 1 million contamination ratio when they're using benzene in the frac fluid. So that's why it's highly.
So in other words, are they using more benzene in the water than we think is safe?
Well, again, when you only use it only takes 5 parts per billion of benzene to contaminate drinking water. You don't need very much benzene to contaminate it, and so that's why I'm saying when they do use the benzene, it's usually a 1 to 1 million contamination ratio. And so then you look at okay, we're fracking a well, and we're using 150,000 gallons of frac fluid. So now you're multiplying 150,000 times a million, and so that's how much contamination ratio you can have. That stuff gets.
So how many more times is there benzene than is safe in the water? Like thousands times more?
Well, millions
times more?
Millions. That's what I'm saying. It's a 1 to 1 million contamination ratio.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So other than now, and we know that benzene causes cancer.
Yes.
And
it is a cancer-causing chemical.
And what other chemicals?
They use formaldehyde. There's the BCAC complex of benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. They've used. There's estimated something like 29 different chemicals that cause cancer or are considered potential cancer causers.
And the ones that you just named are also carcinogenic?
Right.
All right. And so do we know that fracking actually gets in the water supply?
Yeah.
How do we know that?
Like for instance in Pavilion, Wyoming, they've actually found the fracking chemicals in the water there. So it's been proven. We have another case in Canada where Encanta Drilling Company messed up, and when they drilled and they pumped in the fracking chemicals, they actually pumped it into the aquifer and directly contaminated it.
And what is an aquifer?
Basically, it's groundwater. It's a source where your groundwater is found.
So they force the water and these chemicals and the sand through the pipe, and it breaks up the rock.
Correct.
And then the sand keeps those fractures, those breaks,
freezers,
in the rock, and then when they release the pressure, the gas or the water, the gas or the oil and the water and all the chemicals come back up.
Back up to the surface, right.
And then what happens to the water at that point?
Well, they separate the gas from the water. They have separation tanks in that. And then, obviously the gas, they're going to store it in the gas tank. The wastewater, they'll store in tanks. Sometimes they use wastewater pits if they have a lot of it. So they'll pump the wastewater into these open pits that aren't lined. There's over 900 unlined pits in California.
So they take this wastewater and they just put it in basically like a
swimming pool. Yeah, they've dug a hole like a swimming pool.
They dig a hole and they just sit it in there, and it's
Right.
not lined with anything?
Correct.
And they just let it sit there forever, basically?
They'll let it, evaporate, or they'll collect it and take it and pump it back into the ground. Lots of times they'll use produced water to re-inject to get more oil out. So in other words, they're recycling it. But actually the majority of that wastewater is actually pumped back into the ground into injection wells.
They take this wastewater and they just put it in basically like
A swimming pool, yeah.
like
They dug a hole like a swimming pool.
They dig a hole and they just sit it in there and it's
Right.
not lined with anything?
Correct.
And they just let it sit there forever, basically?
Lots of times they'll use produced water to re-inject to get more oil out. So in other words, they're recycling it. But actually the majority of that wastewater is actually pumped back into the ground into injection wells. And that's how they get rid of it. Because again, it's so toxic, they can't leave it on the surface. So they pump it back down into the ground.
So there are these 900 wells that...
Well, no, 900
pits,
like wastewater pits.
Wastewater pits.
Over 900 in California that are unlined. It's a depository. They'll pump it in there. But then part of these 50, well, I should say a lot of these 50,000 are actual gas wells or oil wells where they're pumping the water back down to get more oil out. So they're recycling
So they're recycling it again.
Right.
Right. So what's the problem with fracking? What's the big problem?
The big problem is the chemicals that they use.
Okay.
Again, they're toxic, they're poisonous, they're carcinogenic, and most people don't realize it, but 99% of liquid fresh water is groundwater. 99%. So what we see on the surface, the lakes, the rivers, the streams, that's only 1% of our fresh water. So 5% of those wells fail. And the Deepwater Horizon well is the classic example. That was a brand new well, it failed. For 3 months, oil came bubbling out, and it was a tremendous problem in the Gulf. 30 years from now, that 30 to 70% is going to leak and get into our largest source of fresh water, which is groundwater.
So back before that law was passed in California, the oil and gas industry was allowed basically to frack wherever they wanted without the government even knowing about it?
Correct.
Now, how does fracking pollute the air?
Well, basically, again, you have these unlined pits. And so you have these chemicals that are in there, and they evaporate up into the air. And basically you have the VOCs, which is the volatile organic compounds that are in there. And they get up into the atmosphere and cause asthma, nosebleeds, all kinds of respiratory problems. Also, when they're fracking,
Children are probably more susceptible to that than adults as well.
Correct, children and older people.
Wasn't there a case where a farmer sued an oil or gas company for destroying all his crops?
Right. Basically, there's a farmer called Fred Starr. He's in Kern County. And back around 1999, 2000, he pumped some of his water up from his aquifer, and he mixed it with fresh water, and he watered 6,000 acres of crops, cotton, pistachios, and almonds, and they died. And so they investigated it, and they found chlorine, boron, and then some radioactive compounds in the water. And they determined that these chemicals came from the seepage of these wastewater pits that Area Energy, which is a subsidy of Shell and Exxon, they'd been storing for 30 years this wastewater in these wastewater pits next to his property. And they seeped down into his aquifer, contaminated his aquifer, and so we watered his crops. He lost 6,000 acres of crops. And it took him 10 years, but he won an $8.5 million lawsuit.
And what was the name of that case?
I believe it's Fred Starr versus Area Energy, AERA.
Let me go to you, Ken. Why are we allowing these people to do this?
Well, I think as you heard, this has been going on for a very long time, pretty much, under the radar, so to speak. People just really haven't been aware of it. It's only been in the last 5 or 6 years that this issue of fracking has become public knowledge. It's really only become in the last maybe 3 years that there's been so much of it in the papers. With the Josh Fox film Gaslands and Gasland 2, people started to get a sense of what this was all about. It's pretty straightforward. People need to understand that water is endangered.
Well, let me ask you this. So you guys put together an initiative to ban it here in Butte County.
We did. We went to the Board of Supervisors and tried to convince them as individuals to go ahead and do this. It appeared at one point that they were willing to do that on a 4-1 vote. They instructed County Council to come up with an ordinance. But outside forces, oil and gas, came into our county and basically convinced them that maybe this really wasn't necessary, that this was a political stunt, it was something that would be costly. And we were hoping to get it on the 2014 ballot, and they did have the legal right to spend 30 days studying it, and basically ran the time out. At that point, there wasn't enough time to get it on that ballot.
And that just happened just a few weeks ago then.
And that just happened a few weeks ago. And, the fact that, 71.7% of the people voted to enact this ban is really quite...
How did you do it? How did you get 71% to vote to ban?
I mean, every
fracking
single
here?
person that votes drinks water. Water is a nonpartisan issue. One of the problems that we face, every election cycle is trying to deal with important, serious social, political policy issues in the adversarial, party-based system that we have. What we did is we realized that was a loser for us. What we needed to do was help people understand that there was a threat to their families, to their water, to their farms, and that's what we focused on.
And how did you do that?
On that? Well, we stayed nonpartisan, for one thing. We did not tie our campaign to any particular party or any other issue that was on the ballot. We realized that we needed to look at everyone, which is when you've got 124,000 registered voters, this is not a small task. It didn't really make any difference who the person might be thinking about supporting in, say, the presidential primary. They were still concerned about water. They knew enough about fracking to suspect that it wasn't something that was good for this county.
So now is before the fracking ban that is now in place in Butte County, have there been fracking bans in other counties in the United States?
Well, the entire state of New York has a ban on fracking.
How did that happen?
Well, it happened county by county. I mean, it wasn't like the governor of New York decided this was a great idea and it needed to pass and push the legislature to do it. What happened was people at the county level in counties started passing bans on fracking, and that by the time they got to 200 or 300 counties having passed bans, it became absolutely clear that that's what had to happen statewide.
There actually is a ban of fracking in the state of New York.
In the state of New York. That's
And don't
correct.
they have a huge amount of gas and oil in New York that they could frack out of the ground?
Well, they would love to frack the upstate New York shale. They would love to do it. They know there's a lot of gas up there, but that's also where all of their water comes from. That is their watershed. And I mean, can you imagine New York City? I mean, if New York City cannot exist without upstate New York water, and everyone in New York City knows that and knew that. And again, it was really the same thing that we found here. Nonpartisan, if you're leaving it to the people, we're just not going to do it.
Now, in California, are there other counties that are considering fracking bans?
Yes, there are. Well, there's several counties that have passed bans. San Benito in 2014, Mendocino County, some cities, Santa Cruz, and Santa Barbara in 2014 attempted a ban, but they allowed it to become a partisan argument over economic issues.
Explain how they allowed that to happen.
Well, I mean, I am not a professional. I do not run campaigns for a business. But I understand, from my own training, how messaging works and how what we believe, affects our behavior and on of that. And I've been involved with many campaigns. And so I would say probably the most useful thing I did on some level was just to keep everyone reminded that we had agreed for good reasons to run a nonpartisan campaign based upon so that we could protect our water.
So one way that you avoided that in Butte County was to approach every group, the Farm Bureau, the Kiwanis Club,
I would dare
under
say
phone banking,
that
we call
friend here-
Republicans and Democrats and
called
independents.
all the
Yeah,
Republicans,
right.
Independents, Democrats. You didn't single anyone out
Correct.
or give up on anybody.
And the other thing that helped us was that Dave headed up our education committee and we'd been working as a group on this for a couple years before we realized we had to go an initiative process, and he had been actually doing it even before that. And then we had a year and a half after it was pushed to this ballot. So I dare say Dave has talked to almost every
Anybody that
group
listens.
or organization in the county at least twice. And was able to then develop an education committee. We were on both the college campuses here. I mean, it turns out that probably the Board of Supervisors did us a big favor when they kicked this over to 2016. We were pretty exhausted from just the initiative process, and it gave us plenty of time to help people understand what the issue was.
It was a big gift because the issue was water. And what happened last year? The governor cut our water by 25%. So people all of a sudden are going, wow, maybe this fracking is going to cut more water. And the supervisors did us a huge favor by giving us more time.
Yeah.
And then just all the news of what was going on with fracking. For instance, Demick. The town of Demick, Pennsylvania was in the movie Gasland. And
what happened there?
Well, their water was contaminated. People were actually lighting their kitchen sink water on fire. Well, this year, 2 families received $4.2 million because their water was contaminated. Originally, I think it was something like 25 families, but they whittled it down just to 2 families.
And they received it from who?
From basically a couple of the energy companies that contaminated their water.
Through fracking.
Right, yeah, from fracking, they contaminated their water and they won a $4.2 million lawsuit.
And their water, you could actually light it like a match,
Correct.
like a lighter. You
Yes.
could light their
Kitchen sink water on fire.
kitchen sink water on fire. And
Right,
they
because it was
proved
methane in the water.
That it was methane in the water from fracking.
Yes.
Right.
And so, things like that, we had Santa Barbara oil spill. Here we had Santa Barbara. They lost their initiative to ban fracking there. May of 2015, we get an oil spill in second oil spill. That oil was coming from the Holly platform in the Santa Barbara Channel, which is fracked oil. And it leaked from the All-American Plains pipeline. And so, now we have consequences from fracking.
So that was actually a fracked oil pipeline in the ocean.
Actually, it was on the land.
Well, it was on the land.
Yeah, and it leaked on the land, and then it went down a ravine into the ocean. And so basically, I think something like 10 miles of ocean shoreline
Now,
was
are
contaminated.
there other counties in California where fracking is going to be considered to be banned, or?
Monterey, it's going to be on the November ballot, and then Alameda County supervisors are looking to pass the ban within the supervisors, and that's going to happen within the next couple
Ken,
months.
can you speak to what's going on in Monterey County?
Sure. Well, you know, I mean, it's interesting. Monterey has got 1,000 producing wells right now, and you know, so I guess mostly in southern Monterey County, and so it is a huge issue for the oil and gas industry. My understanding is that the ban there will, within 5 years, close down all the wells, basically, for fracking. To fracking. And
If the ban passes.
if the ban passes.
And this is another ban that would be in front of
Yes.
the voters in the next election.
They just, yes, that's correct. They just got their initiative on the ballot last month.
For November.
It will be on November. Prior to that, months prior to that, the oil and gas industry was already running TV ads nonstop, talking, you know, speaking to what they felt were the problems of a ban there. We've heard that they've already allocated $8 million for that campaign to defeat a fracking ban there. And I got to tell you, $8 million, that's a lot of money to spend in a county the size of Monterey, with the amount of media, even at the price, you know, the cost of media, even with the amount they have, that's a lot of money to spend. But, you know, they did the same thing in the neighboring county, San Benito, and
What happened there?
they spent $2 million. The 38,000 people that live there managed to gather and spend about $120,000, and they passed the ban with what, 65% of the vote or so.
How did they win there?
They literally went house to house and talked to everyone in the county. They've got a lot of organic growers there. I mean, if you pass through that county, you know that it's an agricultural county. They just, you know, it just made no sense for them to take a chance on losing all of their agricultural industry in order for these guys to come in and pull a huge amount of money out of the county and leave. That's basically what's the issue is in Monterey County. I would guess that they will focus on water, they'll focus on maintaining the agricultural base there, protecting farm families, protecting their own, you know, their current economic infrastructure, and, you know, we'll have to see what happens.
This, I believe, that that the people that are fracking our water and allowing these poisonous chemicals that cause cancer, chemicals that destroy our crops, chemicals that destroy our farmland, chemicals that destroy our water supply for generations, should be stopped, should be banned, and it's not worth it having cheap gas. It's not worth it having saving a little money at the pump. It's not worth it saving a little money now to have a little bit cheaper supply of heat. And I hope that that the people in this state and throughout the country pass the same bans that you guys got passed here in Butte County. Thank you.
Here, here.
Thank you.